He will talk to us today. By the way, for people who may have forgotten, today is the anniversary of the historic and also traumatic 9/11 terrorist attack on the World Trade Center in New York and other places in the US, September 11, 9/11. So, to commemorate that unfortunate event, si Professor Rommel Banlaoi here believes, we all believe that prevention is the best response to terrorist threat. Even though we are far away from other terrorist mga targets, we have still, we still need to study and prepare for any counter-terrorism efforts. And we have with us Professor Rommel Banlaoi to discuss what is the situation of terrorist threats in the Philippines, especially in the southern region of BARM, B-A-R-M-M, in Mindanao region. Dr. Rommel Banlaoi will speak, and after that, we will open the floor for questions from our media friends here and via Zoom or via Facebook Live. Dr. Rommel C. Banlaoi is chairman of the Philippine Institute for Peace, Violence, and Terrorism Research. Also serving as the president of the Philippine Society for International Security Studies. And also, Dr. Banlaoi is the convener of the Network for the Prevention of Violent Extremism in the Philippines. Professor Banlaoi also served as the chairman of the Council for Asian Terrorism Research, organized by the Institute for Defense Analysis based in Washington, D.C., also non-resident fellow at the Center for Global Counterterrorism Cooperation based in New York City. So let us not forget that counterterrorism and terrorism is a very important international concern. Professor Rommel Banlaoi is the author of numerous books, journal articles, analyses, book chapters on terrorism issues in the Philippines and also the whole Southeast Asian region. As such, Professor Rommel Banlaoi is dubbed as the father of counter-terrorism research in the Philippines. Let us welcome Dr. Rommel Banlaoi. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much, Wilson. Good morning to everyone. Thank you very much, Wilson, for organizing a Pandesal Forum in commemoration of the 22nd anniversary of 9/11. Let us not forget 9/11 because 9/11 changed the world. You know, 9/11 exposed the vulnerability of the United States as a major power. But now, I will talk about the state of terrorism in the Philippines 22 years after 9/11. And I would like to emphasize the idea that terrorist threats in the Philippines are declining but not disappearing. So since the implementation of the National Action Plan on Preventing and Countering Violent Extremism in 2019 and the subsequent passage of the Anti-Terrorism Act in 2020, threats of terrorism and violent extremism in the Philippines have declined significantly, particularly in the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic. The Global Terrorism Index, which will be shown in the slide, slide list, the Global Terrorism Index released by the Institute for Economics and Peace in March 2020, report index released by the Institute for Economics and Peace in March 2020, reported the drastic improvement in the ranking of the Philippines in the list of countries in the world most impacted by terrorism. From the GTI ranking of 9 in 2018, just a year after the Marawi siege in 2017, the Philippines is now ranking number 18 in the world 2023 Global Terrorism Index. So that is a remarkable improvement. In fact, in the past ranking, the Philippines was at the top 5 and top 10 of the list of countries most impacted by terrorism, but this year, we're already ranking number 18. However, security challenges arising from terrorism and violent extremism have not yet totally disappeared, although it is declining. Based on the 2023 Global Terrorism Index, the Philippines still ranks at the second most affected by terrorism in the Asia Pacific, next only to Myanmar. The Philippines even outrank Indonesia, now viewed to be the new epicenter of militant Islam in Southeast Asia. Indonesia placed third in the 2023 Global Terrorism Index, followed by Thailand and New Zealand, where pockets of terrorist activities still occur. So, state. In February 2023, the United States published its country reports of terrorism covering the year 2021. In this report, the U.S. State Department also acknowledged the remarkable success of the Philippine government in countering insurgency, terrorism, and violent extremism through strong legal actions, arising primarily from the enactment of the 2020 Anti-Terrorism Act and through the non-military countermeasure with the pursuance of various programs associated with the National Action Plan for the Prevention and Countering of Violent Extremism. The U.S. also stressed that the accomplishment of the Philippine government in combating local communist insurgency through focused military operations against the Communist Party of the Philippines and New People's Army, which is also currently experiencing a dramatic decline. At present, the strength of the CPP-NPA has noticeably reduced to less than 2,000 members in the remaining 22 guerrilla fronts nationwide. This is very outstanding drop compared to the 1980s, where the CPP-NPA enjoyed the highest peak of its membership to more than 20,000 combatants. Okay. At present, the CPP-NPA is suffering its weakest level as a result of the decisive dismantlement of many guerrilla fronts, neutralization of key leaders, and surrender of remaining followers. The National Task Force to End the Local Communist Armed Conflict already declares the CPP-NPA as a dying threat in 2023, with anticipation of a total victory by 2025. So that is the optimism of the NTF-LCA. But the U.S. State Department strongly warns that armed groups associated with the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria remains as the deadliest threat in the Philippines. Next slide, please. It also contends that the Philippines continues to be one of the major destinations of foreign terrorist fighters coming largely from Indonesia and Malaysia, as well as countries from the Middle East and Europe, where so-called ISIS provinces continue to operate, especially in Afghanistan, the headquarters of ISIS Khorasan. So if you will look at the map, these are the provinces of ISIS all over the world, and there is a province of ISIS in Afghanistan called ISIS Khorasan, with strong link with ISIS in Southeast Asia, especially ISIS in the Philippines. The Islamic State Khorasan, which is based in Afghanistan, was responsible for the funding and support of the 2017 Marawi siege and other suicide bombing activities right after that. Remnants of the Abu Sayyaf Group, Bangsamoro Islamic Freedom Fighters, the Mauti Group, the Salahuddin Group, Ansar Khalifa Philippines, or so-called the Magid Group, and the Suyuful Khilafah Luzon have been identified to be active ISIS affiliates in the Philippines, collectively known as the Dawliyah Islamiyah Philippines. So that is the structure of Dawliyah Islamiyah Philippines. ISIS Khorasan, or the Islamic State Khorasan, supported these ISIS groups in the Philippines to mount the 2017 Marawi siege and the series of suicide terrorist attacks in Mindanao in the aftermath of the siege. Through the Islamic State Khorasan, though the Islamic State Khorasan attempts to revitalize its strong links with ISIS followers and sleeper cells in the Philippines, particularly in the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao, the Anti-Terrorism Act of 2020 and the National Action Plan for the Prevention and Countering of Violent Extremism have enabled the Philippines to effectively counter threats of terrorism and violent extremism in the country through the application not only of the whole of government approach, but also the whole of society and the whole of nation approaches. There are evidences, however, that terrorist threats posed by ISIS in the Philippines are declining. What are the evidences of their decline? One, diminished manpower, influence, and firefighting capabilities. Second, increased surrender of militants. And third, decrease in violent activities. The manpower, influence, and firefighting capability of ISIS-affiliated groups in the Philippines has steadily diminished since 2021. The ASG, for example, suffered tremendous setbacks in membership from 130 in 2021 to mere 70 in 2022, representing a decrease of 46% in personnel strength. Many of its key leaders have been killed, while those still alive are continuously on the run. Because of the failure of the ASG to mount major violent incidents for the last 2 years, the provincial government of Sulu already declared the whole province of Sulu as already ASG-free. In central Mindanao, the Bangsamoro Islamic Freedom Fighter, especially the faction of Abu Turaipe, only had 31 members to date, okay, especially at the end of 2022. In central Mindanao, okay, ground intelligence sources reported in August 2023, but I'm still validating this report, that Abu Turaipe and his 5 key followers have surrendered to military forces in Barangay Buayan, Datupiyang, Maguindanao. Media and academic reports inaccurately describe Abu Turaipe as the new ISIS leader in Southeast Asia or the Islamic State Wilaya. But styling Turaipe as the new leader of the Islamic State Southeast Asia was just a propaganda in the desperate attempt of ISIS to attract new followers from the southern Philippines. In Lanao provinces, intelligence authorities are monitoring at least 46 remnants of the Mauti group in 2022. But ground informants indicate that since the death of Abu Zakaria in 2023, the Mauti group has been practically deactivated with the surrender of most of its members. Those who have not surrendered are currently seeking refuge with their relatives in some camps of the More Islamic Liberation Front. Okay? In Sok Sargen, especially in the provinces of South Cotabato, Sultan Kudarat, Sarangani, and General Santos, remaining followers of the Salahuddin group and the Ansar Khalifa Philippines or the Magid group are also suffering the same fate of eventual demise. The Suyuful Khilafah Luzon has also failed to operate and mount violent activities for the last 2 years. Second, increased surrender. Many of the terrorist fighters are now leaving terrorism behind. Many personalities associated with the ASG, BIFF, Ansar Khalifa Philippines, Mauti Group, Suyuful Khilafah Luzon, collectively known as the Dawliyah Islamiyah Philippines, have walked away from terrorism by surrendering to government authorities. As of August 2023, close to 2,000 individuals associated with Dawliyah Islamiyah Philippines have left terrorism behind by surrendering in Sulu, Basilan, Tawi-Tawi, Lanao del Sur, Maguindanao, and Sultan Kudarat provinces. In Sulu province alone, at least 73%, please, next slide please. This slide will tell you about the foreign terrorist fighters. Just to show you their way of penetrating Marawi siege. Go ahead. See the routes. But these routes have already been disrupted by coordinated actions of Malaysia, Philippines, and Indonesia. And that is why coordinated actions of Indonesia, Philippines, and Malaysia are preventing the entry of foreign terrorist fighters to enter the Philippines. Okay? So they are now having difficulties penetrating the Philippines. These are the numbers of surrenderers in Sulu alone. Okay? In Sulu province alone, at least 773 persons linked with the Abu Sayyaf group have surrendered from 2017 to 2022. If you Google Abu Sayyaf group right now, you will see a lot of news items about surrendering. Almost 95% of news items about Abu Sayyaf group will be about surrender. Unlike before the 2017 Marawi siege, if you type Abu Sayyaf group, you will see news about kidnapping, bombing, ambuscades, harassment. But now, 90% of the news about Abu Sayyaf group will be news about surrender of members. News about militants in Mindanao surrendering to authorities continue to flood major dailies, replacing news that used to cover bombings, kidnappings, and other violent activities. Those still active are on the run, seeking refuge from trusted relatives and friends. The Dawliyah Islamiyah Philippines also failed to initiate major terrorist activities in 2021 and 2022. From January to August 2023, for example, intelligence authorities have monitored no major ISIS-initiated violent incidents in the country, except for some minor shooting incidents, grenade throwing, and small firefights with local security forces. Remarkably, violent groups like the Abu Sayyaf group, the Bangsamoro Islamic Freedom Fighter, have not conducted any major bombing and kidnapping operations so far for the whole year of 2023. However, there is no need to be complacent, as terrorist threats in the Philippines are metamorphosing into different forms. It is still very imperative to stay vigilant and remain alert. While ISIS threats are declining, they are not disappearing as they are still remnants and sleeper cells willing to sow terror. To finally defeat ISIS threats in the Philippines, it is very important to sustain efforts to counter the financing of terrorism, to intensify counter-violent extremism programs, and to strengthen the intelligence and counterintelligence operations against remaining leaders and followers. Currently, terror threats in the Philippines are no longer confined with ISIS or the CPP-NPA. Private armed groups maintained by local politicians involved in various forms of violent activities have been identified as new sources of terror in the Philippines. The designation of Congressman Arnulfo Teves Jr. as a terrorist and his armed group as a terrorist group indicates that the scope of terrorism can now include private armed groups. If not prevented, private armed groups can pose a more serious terrorist threat in the Philippines than ISIS and CPP-NPA. Various private armed groups in the Philippines persist, particularly in the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao. Before the May 2022 elections, next slide, the National Task Force for the Disbandment of Private Armed Groups reported the neutralization of 20 private armed groups in Mindanao. But almost all municipalities in the Bangsamoro region have clans maintaining their own private army. Next slide, for example. These are the list of private armed groups still operating in Lanao del Sur, Basilan, Sulu, and Tawi-Tawi. Okay. So, next slide. And so that's in Mindanao. So, associated with private armed groups is the proliferation of private small arms and light weapons in the country. Most of the small arms and light weapons are found in the Bangsamoro region, representing 80% okay, of the total illegally proliferated small arms and light weapons in the country. Other places in the Philippines only represent 20% of the total illegal small arms and light weapons. At least 600,000 loose firearms continue to proliferate in the country at present. Okay? So, these are the threats that we need to face. Aside from private armed groups, disgruntled elements of the Moro Islamic Liberation Front and lawless personalities associated with the Moro National Liberation Front can also mount terror attacks. Though the Philippine government considers the MILF and the MNLF as peace-inclined armed groups for supporting the Bangsamoro peace process, unlawful actions of their disgruntled and lawless elements can disrupt the ongoing peace-building efforts in the Bangsamoro region, particularly in the normalization process, which requires the decommissioning of 40,000 MILF combatants and their firearms. However, not more than 50% or 14,495 combatants have been decommissioned as of August 2022. The planned transformation of MILF-based command to normal communities has not been fully realized. So, in conclusion, 22 years, next slide, okay, that will conclude. 22 years after 9/11, threats of terrorism, insurgency, and violent extremism in the Philippines have tremendously declined. ISIS groups in the country, particularly in the Bangsamoro region, and their guerrilla fronts of the CPP-NPA all over the country have reduced significantly, showing signs of near conclusion. However, there is still a need to remain vigilant as there are still remnants with strong intention to wreak havoc. Moreover, terrorist threats in the Philippines are transforming into new forms to include private armed groups and lawless elements of peace-inclined armed groups. Okay. To sustain the achievements of the Philippines in combating terrorism and violent extremism, it is imperative to continue the implementation not only of the whole of government approach, but more so of the whole of nation approach emphasized in the Philippine Development Plan. So this is the strategy framework of our Philippine Development Plan, and next slide, and the national security policy of the Philippine government. Application of these approaches can really prevent threat groups to recover, regain strength, and disturb the peace in the Philippines that remains to be fragile. Thank you very much, Will. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Rommel Banlaoi, for very comprehensive, detailed analysis of the terrorist situation in the Philippines, actually improving situation. That's good news. By the way, congratulations, Professor Banlaoi, for your various books, like this book about the Abu Sayyaf group of Mindanao and other publications. So, Professor, to summarize what you said, can we say based on your analysis, the terrorist threat situation in the Philippines has declined, has improved in the last several years?
Yes, especially with the ISIS groups because they have failed to conduct any major violent incidents for the last 2 years. So it's declining, but
Yes.
it's not disappearing yet.
Yes.
It's not yet disappearing.
Sir, Professor, may tanong ako. Maraming mga tanong dito. Can we attribute this decline in activities of terrorists and threats partly to the decisive, though bloody victory in Marawi? Was it a turning point, the Marawi victory? Or there's a global or international situation that affected this trend?
You know, in my analysis of terrorist threats in the Philippines,
Yes.
what contributed to the rapid decline of terrorist threats in the Philippines was not really strong military actions, but strong involvement of the local government and the civil society because they own counter-terrorism measures. So they actively participated in countering terrorism in the country through non-military measures, especially the implementation of the National Action Plan to prevent and counter violent extremism. The local government, the participation of the local government, the civil society, and the private sector contributed tremendously to the decline. But the military and the Philippine National Police contributed a lot in countering the armed activities of the Abu Sayyaf group through the kinetic approach, what we call focused military operation, kinetic approach. But
Yes.
I attribute the decline largely from non-military measures being implemented by local government, civil society, and the private sector.
Professor, you mentioned also the decline in NPA, CPP, NPA violent attacks. Am I correct? When did this trend go down?
The trend started with the implementation of focused military operations of the armed forces of the Philippines and intensified law enforcement operations of the Philippine National Police,
Yes.
complemented by strong civil society and local government support. Okay, through the initiatives of local government authorities. They implemented this barangay development program. So they use a combination of military and non-military approaches, but they emphasized more developmental approach to transform communist-infected communities into a more developmental communities. So they put a lot of the developmental efforts that discourage armed
Terrorist
groups,
activities.
to mount armed activities.
So, Professor, I was struck also by your report. Feel free to ask questions, yung mga tao dito and sa social media. I was struck by your report that 80% of loose firearms unregistered are in the farm area up to now.
Yes, that's the sad reality that we need to face. 80%
yes.
proliferating in the Bangsamoro region.
But the AFP and the PNP are present in farm, of course, di ba? They are still there. So, nationwide, the situation is stable.
Yes.
I got also some questions here. They said, is the weakening of the NPA CPP rebellion or insurgency, can the killing or the elimination of their top leaders, will it contribute to this situation improving continuously?
The neutralization of key leaders of the communist movement also contributed to the decline of the threat because they lost their ideological beacon, they lost their operational leaders, so they are now more vulnerable to focused military operations of the armed forces of the Philippines. In fact, the National Task Force to end the local armed communist insurgency has already declared the CPP-NPA as a dying threat.
And you mentioned that their target, the AFP target is total victory 2025?
Yes.
What do you mean by total victory? Meaning it's no longer a major threat, it's
it will
non-existent?
Yes, it will no longer be a major threat. So let's see whether that's gonna happen in 2025.
Is it true the NPA force is the oldest left-wing insurgency in Southeast Asia? It is the oldest?
To be precise, it is the longest running Maoist insurgency in the world.
In the world. I think Peru Fujimori emasculated already the Luminoso something, Sendero Luminoso. Very interesting. So is it also a global trend that even the hometown of Mao is already mix of socialism and capitalism? Is it possible also, aside from the success of our government efforts and military efforts, is it a global trend also?
The world is changing, so the communist ideology is also waning. So I consider communist ideology as already a lost struggle, because even
Socialists are
communist
rejecting
regime
them.
in the world, like Vietnam,
Yes.
China, and North Korea, they're already changing also.
Yes.
Yeah, it's no longer the same like during the Cold War.
So what are the other regions? Barm, sorry, hindi kami expert. What provinces of the Philippines part of Barm?
There are 5 provinces in the BARM, but for me right now, the most vulnerable to armed activities
Yes.
will be Central Mindanao,
Which is-
covering the provinces of Maguindanao and Sultan Kudarat. And
Those
some,
two na lang.
yeah, and some barang villages in Lanao del Sur. But Sulu is already
Getting better.
Yeah. You can enjoy your tourism already in Sulu.
Will it become Tawi-Tawi?
So Tawi-Tawi and
It's very
Basilan
good.
also, yeah. In fact, Governor Sacortan invited me to visit Sulu to enjoy my vacation without bodyguards.
Oh,
Yes.
I heard Sulu. I read and I heard Sulu daw. There's a beach there daw as beautiful or better than Boracay daw.
Yes, there
There's some
are
beach daw.
a lot of pristine beaches in Sulu, Tawi-Tawi, and Basilan, and I look forward to visit one of them in the
Yes.
near future.
What presidency started this victorious trend against terrorism? When did you notice it? Was it GMA era? Was it Noña Aquino? Was it the very strong-willed Duterte era? Who started it?
Middle of the Duterte period, but of
The
course
decline.
the previous governments contributed to the success.
Overall effort.
But the achievements became so noticeable after the passage of the Anti-Terrorism Act of 2020, because the Anti-Terrorism Act of 2020 enabled the Philippine government to have more capabilities. One, to counter the financing of terrorism. That's one.
To block it, yes.
Yes. Second, to intensify intelligence operations against terrorist threats. And also, third, to implement non-military measures, okay, through the implementation of the National Action Plan to prevent and counter violent extremism. All these factors contributed to the decline.
Some of the journalist friends are asking questions. Internationally, how do you assess? Kasi sabi nila, based on your analysis, Professor Rommel Banlaoi, international terrorist groups have been coordinating with the terrorist groups in Malawi, Abu Sayyaf. What is the situation internationally of terrorism
Well, right
after
now,
9/11?
ISIS
On the decline?
Yeah, ISIS worldwide is also suffering a lot of setbacks because of the death of their key leaders also. But most active ISIS groups are no longer in the Asia Pacific. They are in fact in the African region.
What part of Africa?
Especially in North Africa, Somalia,
Sudan.
Sudan. Those with presence of Al-Shabaab groups. But in the Asia Pacific, it's already declining.
What about the Pakistan, Afghanistan area? Is it still a threat, or after the US left and everything?
Pakistan and Afghanistan are still countries facing a lot of security challenges because of the ISIS groups are still active there, especially especially the activities of ISIS Khorasan. So and there are also other ISIS groups in Pakistan. So there are greater challenges in that area than in Southeast Asia. You know, the challenge now in Southeast Asia is no longer with the Philippines, but the challenge is now happening largely now in Indonesia.
Uh, why Indonesia? Is it worse than before? That there were several Indonesian terrorist attacks before, the hotel and then the attack in Bali and all that. How do you assess Indonesia now and Malaysia?
Well, the situation there is also improving as a result of global improvement of terrorism situation. But there are still supporters that can still make trouble in the area. That is why I emphasize that there's still no need to be complacent, because though terrorist threats are declining, they are not yet totally disappearing. So we still need to hold our ground, to be
be
more
vigilant.
vigilant and to be more alert to finally defeat them.
And to not be relaxed in security protocols, di ba? Sa mga airport and major areas. Professor, there's another question. What about religious extremism? Because several journalists are asking religious extremism in some areas, breeding ground for future terrorists. How do you assess that in southern Philippines and Southeast Asia?
There are efforts to counter religious extremism now. In fact, we are holding another international conference in the Philippines, supported by the European Union, to sustain our efforts in countering religious extremism, not only in Southeast Asia but also in the whole world. So there are many efforts of the civil society in tandem with the government authorities. So we are doing a lot of efforts to counter religious extremism. You know where the threat is coming from now?
Yes.
It's no longer from religious extremism,
Social
but by
media.
right-wing extremism.
Yes.
That is now the new trend of threats happening in the world.
You're talking about right-wing politically.
Politically.
It's not the religious. You're correct, you're correct. Even in the US, it's a dangerous thing. In Europe, you're correct.
Right-wing extremism is on the rise.
Yes.
Religious Islamist terrorism is on the decline.
Is it because of unstable economic situation of the world? Is it breeding ground for that? Or is social media also a dangerous way of expanding right-wing extremism, right-wing political?
I have not conducted any serious study about that, but my tentative analysis is that it's a combination of many factors. Because the world is changing. The world is changing. You know, there is the rise of right-wing extremism in Europe and in North America.
Yes.
Targeting, targeting Asians.
Yes. That's why Asians have become scapegoats ever since the pandemic. What effect now of pandemic on terrorism? Did it curtail terrorism because it made travel and physical activities more controlled? Did this also lessen terrorism?
Yeah, it lessened the movement of terrorists worldwide because of strict immigration controls during the pandemic. But remember, in 2020,
Yes.
Abu Sayyaf group was able to mount its deadliest attack during the pandemic.
Yes,
But they
yes.
failed to do that again in 2021 to 2022 because of greater international cooperation for counterterrorism. So that is the thing that I need to emphasize 22 years after 9/11. Now,
So the situation in the world is changing.
it's changing, and sources of terrorist threats are no longer confined with ISIS groups or Al-Qaeda
Yes.
groups. It's coming from other sources already.
You mentioned, Professor, several media people asking also, you mentioned that private political clans and private armies in the Philippines have become a source of terrorist threat. And the election will be coming 2025, and there will be barangay election in December, late this year. How do you see the situation of private armies affecting us?
Right now, based on the slides that I presented, there are various private armed groups in the Philippines. But this is the good news about these private armed groups.
What's the good news?
Majority about these private armed groups all over the Philippines, especially in the Barm regions, are what I call benign armed groups, meaning they are not as violent as others. So the designation of Tevis group as a terrorist group by the Philippine government is a warning to other private armed groups to remain benign and refrain from the use of violence. So if you have private armies, use your private armies for peaceful purposes.
For peacekeeping,
for peacekeeping,
civil,
for protection,
Oo.
but not for sowing terror. Because if you use your private armed groups to sow terror and to wreak havoc, then the Philippine government can use the Anti-Terrorism Act of 2020 to take legal action against the law.
So, Professor Rommel, can we thank also the authors of the Anti-Terrorist Act for helping accelerate this positive trend of declining terrorism?
I think that's the acknowledgement of many sectors that the Anti-Terrorism Act of 2020 contributed tremendously to the decline of
Who were the
terrorism.
authors of this act in Senate and Congress?
I forgot already.
Maybe I think Ping Lacson and maybe
Ping Lacson in the Senate and
somebody in the Congress.
Soto, yeah. I forgot. Yeah.
Very interesting. So you are optimistic in general.
I am very optimistic that threats of terrorism in the Philippines, especially coming from ISIS groups, okay, will eventually disappear. However, a new terrorist threats can appear, and this
Yes.
can emanate from private armed groups and even lawless elements of the MILF and the MNLF. In fact, I'm more concerned on the MILF because there are
These
still,
are the breakaway groups of MILF.
I'm not even talking about the breakaway group. I'm
The
talking
MILF
about the
itself.
MILF because based on the peace process,
They will be part of the government,
they
di
should
ba?
be part of the government. But until now, only 50% of the combatants of the MILF have undergone the normalization process. Meaning,
So all
from
of
being combatants
50% are not yet
are
part
not
of
yet.
the...
Yes.
What are they doing?
Waiting for the normalization program to happen. So that's why we need to pay attention to that remaining 50%.
So the MILF is the largest non-AFP, non-PNP group with arms.
Yes. They still have the armed groups. They are still active combatants of the MILF. So, if they are
Understood.
disgruntled, yes, and if they decide to resort to lawless activities, that will be a problem. That is why it's very important for the Philippine government to pay serious attention to the completion of the normalization program in order to transform all these remaining combatants of the MILF from a fighter to normal civilian members of our society.
So
So
this,
it's called normalization. They
Yes.
will no longer be combatants.
they will be part of the AFP or retired.
It depends on the program of their normalization process because some of the combatants may be recruited by the AFP of the PNP. But still, 50% is still waiting for the normalization program.
Any recommendations now for, they're asking here, any recommendations, you're an expert on anti-terrorism, what do you recommend for our AFP and for the PNP also to continue their success?
Yeah, as I said in my conclusion, sustain the effort of focused military operations and intensified law enforcement operations, sustain the efforts in National Action Plan in preventing and countering violent extremism, especially with the involvement of civil society, private sector, and local government authorities, okay? And also effective application of the anti-terrorism law of 2020. Just sustain these efforts, okay?
Yes.
Because if we don't sustain these efforts and we become complacent, okay, these groups may recover and regain their strength. So let us prevent them to recover and regain their strength.
So, based on what you just reported, surprisingly, I did not, I thought I already knew a lot. So, do you see the day that Sulu will become a normal province like Tawi-Tawi and Palawan and Bohol for tourism?
Yes.
When will that happen in Sulu?
Well, the Sulu provincial government is now promoting Sulu as the new tourism destination of the country.
Soon?
With the establishment of several resorts in the province already.
No kidding.
Yes, let's go there.
Wow, I was there before many years ago. Every single person had guns.
Now, I was told by Governor Sakurtan that
Yes.
you can enjoy the resorts in Sulu without
Wow.
your bodyguards. Okay. So you can now enjoy a peaceful, normal life in Sulu without fear of kidnapping, without fear of bombing, okay, without fear of intimidations from lawless elements.
So good news for the
It's a good
Philippines.
news. So, but I said, though we are experiencing
Improvement.
peace in Mindanao, our peace remains to be fragile.
Yes,
So we
yes.
still need to sustain our efforts in countering these threats.
In Southeast Asia, you are also optimistic overall.
Yes, because of greater international cooperation in countering terrorism. Before there was no international cooperation. The international cooperation was limited. Now,
What do you mean by international cooperation? Is it support from our neighbors like Malaysia, Indonesia?
yes,
Or is it because of the Western support or Israel or China?
combination of all these international actions. Combination niya. But right now, if you look at Southeast Asia,
Yeah.
China, Philippines, Malaysia, and Indonesia are now closely cooperating.
Ah,
Countering terrorism, especially those emanating from the tri-border area of Sulu and Sulawesi. And the rest of ASEAN, we have now ASEAN Convention to counter terrorism.
so wala na rin ang MNLF, the former MNLF, wala na rin yun.
Well, we still have the MNLF, but they are now part of the Bangsamoro Parliament. They are
Ah,
now called Peace Inclined Group, MNLF.
so,
The MILF
to
also.
summarize again, for people like us who are not knowledgeable, ang BART is the autonomous region.
Yes, composed of 5 provinces.
What are
Sulu,
these?
Basilan, Tawi-Tawi, the 2 Maguindanaos, and Lanao del Sur.
Not Sulu.
Sulu, Basilan, Tawi-Tawi.
Ah, yes, yes.
Sulu, Basilan, Tawi-Tawi, Lanao del Sur, and the 2 Maguindanaos.
Wow. So majority of our Filipino Muslim brothers live in these areas.
Yes.
So good news for them.
Good news for our brothers in the Bangsamoro region.
How many Muslim in the country? Estimated Filipino Muslim Moros.
I don't have in my fingertips
But
right
several
now.
million.
Not in my fingertips. Around 10%, right? Ano? But not in my fingertips.
I'm just very curious, Professor Rommel. Was the election victory of Mindanao president part of the success story also on the of getting all these insurgents to be part of Philippine society? Was it part of it?
Yeah, Duterte contributed a lot to the success because he gave a strong marching order to the armed forces of the
To
Philippines
fight them
to destroy the Abu Sayyaf group.
militarily.
Militarily, that's why
And
we have this focus military
infrastructures.
operation. He declared martial law in Mindanao.
The whole Mindanao.
The whole Mindanao
Up to when?
during the Marawi season.
No, no more.
Not no more. There's no more martial law. Okay, no more. So that's why Duterte contributed a lot to the success
Of his own region.
of Mindanao.
So now 911, where were you when 911 happened? Where were you? What were you doing? Who told you there was attack in New York?
In 2001,
Where were you? at
I
that time?
was a professor at the National Defense College of the Philippines.
Wow.
I was teaching counterterrorism before 911.
Wow.
As early as 1989, I was already studying 911 bill.
Wow.
But at that time, nobody was paying attention to me every time I
Yes.
talked about Abu Sayyaf group, I
Yes.
talked about terrorism. Nobody was paying attention to
Yes.
me because it was not a very interesting topic.
Yes,
Only
not in the news.
interesting for Israel,
Specialist.
for the United States,
Yes,
but
yes.
not for the majority of the people. After 911,
Everybody became interested.
after 911, they were asking for the explanation why it happened. Why 911 happened? And I raised my hand, I said, I can explain why it happened. It all happened because they planned it in the Philippines 5 years before.
Am I correct that the brother-in-law of Osama bin Laden was all over Mindanao at that time?
Yes, Muhammad Jamal Khalifa was here.
Why here? Why?
He was organizing the Abu
Yes.
Sayyaf group and strengthening the structure of Al-Qaeda in the Philippines.
And there was a bombing somewhere in New York or something na somebody here in the Philippines was connected.
In 1993, Ramsey
Yes, yes, I read.
attempted to destroy the Twin Tower of New York City. He
From the
failed.
Philippines, di ba?
No. He failed to
Yes.
destroy the Twin Tower by using a track bomb.
Yes.
Because he was anticipating, but by using the track bomb at the the basement of the Twin Tower will collapse. He failed, Ramsey Youssef failed. So, he escaped United States, went to Pakistan, and transferred to the Philippines to
Why?
operate.
I'm curious. Why Philippines? Is it because our laws, our peace and order efforts are too loose?
At that time, they
At that
selected the
time?
Philippines. I discovered 3 explanations.
Why?
As a result of our study at that time.
Yes.
Why they chose the Philippines? Number
As their
one,
base.
there was a very restive Muslim communities.
Ah,
so they
unhappy.
have support network.
Yes.
They have support network.
They could
So
just-
they can operate. Yes.
Yes.
They can just,
Quietly.
Yes. Second, they say that, Philippine law enforcement authorities
Are very
are
lax.
lax. They
Yes.
can easily
Yes.
or they can bribe.
Yes.
Okay. And third, it's easy to come to the Philippines. It was easy to come to the Philippines.
Ah.
So that's why they
They could come and go
they
easily.
went here. In 1995, they planned to destroy the Twin Tower, okay, 5 years before 9/11. It's called the
Wow.
Mujinka plot.
Ah, yes, yes,
They
yes.
went to Malate, the Don
Yes,
Jose,
yes.
Don Josepa apartment as their headquarters to mount
Grabe.
terror. They plan to assassinate Pope John Paul II.
Yes, yes.
And
When
even
he
they
came
plan to
here.
assassinate former President Bill Clinton.
Here in the Philippines also.
You know,
Wow.
the person over there.
Yes.
He's smiling. He was
Yes.
still a young rookie at that time for his Rico, but he was already doing
Wow.
intelligence. and
Anti-terrorism.
Yes. He's smarter than me when it comes to this area.
Wow. So in the Philippines, the religious extremist forces or groups are still here? Or no more? Less na?
Yes, but they are not yet disappearing, as
Yes.
I said. There are still sleeper cells around, but they're having difficulties
Recruiting.
operating. Difficulties because of, number one, we have a better way of countering the financing of terrorism. Without money, it's very difficult to operate.
This is anti-terrorism law.
Yes, not only part of the anti-terrorism law, but also of the Anti-Money Laundering Act.
Ah,
Okay. Second, we have a better intelligence and counterintelligence operations against them. Just imagine, better measure to counter the financing terrorism, better intelligence is a recipe for success against terrorism.
are these improvements partly due to the anti-terrorism law or not?
It's a product of a series of activities for capacity building after 9/11. Because after 9/11, our law enforcement authorities enjoyed a lot of capacity building programs, not only from the United States, but also from Israel,
Yes.
from Japan, from Australia, from the European Union. So we built...
Israel also helping
Yes,
us,
of course.
even though they're far away.
No,
They're experts
Mossad is the best
anti-terrorism group
anti-terrorism
in
group
the world.
in the whole world.
Who's number 2?
It's a CIA.
US.
Yes.
Number 3?
Maybe...
Maybe Germany? No. South Korea? Maybe China?
Maybe China.
Maybe China.
Maybe China.
Because they have high tech to trace everything. Interesting, huh? So, good news. Overall, what you just described and analyzed today, so because of waning terrorist threat, can we say peace and order in the Philippines will continue to improve? It is still okay.
If we will sustain our efforts based on our current achievements, it will improve.
Our overall peace and order.
Yes. But as I said, the peace that we currently enjoy remains fragile.
The price of freedom is eternal vigilance.
Yes, so we need eternal vigilance to protect the peace that we currently enjoy.
Professor, you were former Deputy National Security Advisor of this government now. Do you see the national security situation of the country, the peace and order, very good now? How do you rate it?
Our national security situation,
The peace and order?
especially the peace and order, is improving a lot. Improving a lot. But we still need to do a lot of work in fighting, criminalities.
And prevent them.
Yeah, and prevent them. But I have another
Yes.
topic that I want to emphasize, but
Yes.
We can discuss that in another
Session.
Yeah.
Can you just tell us a topic?
I'm seeing another emerging national security threat.
Can you mention it now?
corruption.
Ay, horrible, yes. What is the estimate by people? I keep hearing some people said 20% of the budget, some people said 30. What is the general malites outside?
Based on our national security policy, that has been recognized that corruption is also a national security threat. So we need to fight corruption. Because if we cannot curb corruption in our country, that can become our national security threat. More alarming than the other
anything.
threat. That's why we need to curb corruption. You know why?
Yes.
People power took place in 1986?
Yes, because of too much.
Because anti-corruption. In 2000, it's corruption. The issue is number one, corruption.
Yes.
We can, in fact, endure poverty,
Yes.
but we cannot tolerate corruption.
Yes, yes. Very good. Si Professor Rommel Banlaoi. Any other questions you'd like to raise just in case na miss out? Feel free, I will check lang ha. Some people are texting their questions and very interesting ha. So today 911, we have good news for the Philippines and for the world. How do you assess the world today in terms of anti-terrorism? How many years? 22 years after 911. How do you assess anti-terrorism in the world now? In the Middle East, up to here.
Right now, the epicenter of counter-terrorism threats will be concentrated now in North African region.
Is Syria already stable? Not yet. Syria area.
There are still a lot of security challenges in Syria,
In Syria, Libya, Iraq.
and even in Afghanistan.
Yes, not yet stable.
Still vulnerable situation. That's why we need to keep the peace there. Otherwise, we will lose all the efforts that we exerted to. But there are still a lot of pockets of terrorist activities because ISIS,
Yes,
though they
it's
are
still
down, they are not yet totally defeated.
Not yet out. I read that there's news in England, like there was a terrorist attack, England or US, somewhere recent lang.
That's why, as you
Yes.
said, we have to be eternally vigilant.
Vigilant. Even the right-wing political forces in the world are an emerging threat.
For me, the threat is more serious in Europe and North America, but not in Asia. You know why?
Yes.
Because in my thinking, the target of right-wing extremism are Asians.
Yes.
Unlike Islamic terrorism, their targets are Americans and Anglo-Saxons.
Yes,
right?
yes.
Now it's the reverse. Right?
Yes.
The target are Asian.
So, this is almost off
Especially
topic.
Chinese.
Yes, is the unresolved U.S.-China strategic conflict and all these public acrimonious exchanges contributing to this anti-Asian trend and violence across North America? So we should help. Hopefully, the two superpowers can stabilize the relations. Hopefully.
It affects. That's why it's very important for us to really convince the United States and China to really manage their differences.
Yes. So that affect all Asia.
Because if they are quarreling, we will be affected, especially the Philippines, because we are at the crossroads
Yes.
of U.S.-China major power rivalry.
So peace also needs eternal vigilance on that. No. Very
The good thing
Yes.
about U.S. and China when it comes to counterterrorism,
Yeah, very good.
they are cooperating, but
Yes.
they have only one issue,
Yes.
and the issue is the observance of human rights in counterterrorism. That's
very
the main
interesting.
issue between U.S. and China in counterterrorism, the issue of human rights.
The methods. But Guantanamo Bay is still there. Guantanamo Bay is still there.
I don't know.
That's the place
In
where they
Cuba,
throw all the terrorists.
Yeah.
Oh.
I think it's being dismantled, right? But
They promised to dismantle.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure of the current status of
I think
Guantanamo.
Obama promised, but not yet totally dismantled and not yet returned to Cuba. Very interesting. So, anti-terrorism is better now. Thank you to outstanding and vigilant intellectuals like Professor Rommel Banlaoi for helping us in the Philippines understand and react to terrorism better. Any last words you'd like to give to the public about vigilance and how we non-military, non-government people can support the anti-terrorism efforts of the government? What can we do as people in media, people in the business and professional sectors, and civil society?
22 years after 9/11, I see great lesson from our efforts. And the great lesson is that once we own the efforts to counter terrorism, owned by the local authorities, owned by the civil society, and owned by the wider society, the prospect for success is very high. And that is why we're able to achieve a lot in counterterrorism because the efforts is now being owned by the greater society. Unlike before, it's purely military.
Purely military and political.
But now, the military has also realized that non-military measures are important to finally defeat terrorism. That is why we need to continue to get involved in fighting this menace.
Who are more concerned with anti-terrorism, the PNP or AFP? Sinong mas busy sa dalawa?
They have always coordination coordination between the armed forces of the Philippines and the Philippine National Police. They are paying attention to what we call in counterterrorism as kinetic approach. It's called the kinetic approach. It's called the kinetic approach. So it's always a tandem for the AFP and the Philippine National Police. But in other countries, it's only the responsibility of the Philippine National Police because the armed forces, the responsibility of the armed forces would be external defense. But now, because we are winning in the fight against internal threats to our security, the armed forces of the Philippines can now focus on external defense and issue of internal security
and calamity assistance.
Yes, also. Can now be fully transferred to the Philippine National Police.
Very good. So now the Philippine National Police is the one more into anti-terrorism now.
Technically, that's the main job of the police.
Do they have an anti-terrorism group inside PNP?
Yes, they have. They have the anti-terrorism group.
Wow.
They have the anti-terrorism unit.
Thank you to Mr. Anti-Terrorism Professor Rommel Banlaoi.
Thank you very much, Wilson, for the great opportunity. And 22 years after 9/11, let us not forget that it happened. So let's remain vigilant and alert in countering this threat. But meanwhile, let's enjoy the peace. Let's
And
go
fight
to
other
Sulu.
threats.
Yeah, let's go to Sulu, Basilan, and Tawi-Tawi. Enjoy the peace there. Enjoy tourism there, and find out. Okay.
Support Mindanao tourism.
Support Mindanao tourism and support the Mindanao peace process.
Thank you very much, Professor Rommel Banlaoi, for being very comprehensive, enlightening in your analysis. Your dedication to counter-terrorism studies not only contributes to intellectual development of our scholars and people who are students, but to actual peace and order efforts.
You know,
Yes.
Wilson, because terrorist threats in the Philippines are declining,
Yes.
I am now lessening also my attention on terrorism in the Philippines.
Ah.
I am passing the baton to the younger generation to do the
To study.
counter-terrorism research because I will focus heavily now
International
in
relations.
geopolitics of
Yes.
the West Philippine Sea
Yes.
and promoting better understanding between the Philippines and China.
And preventing possibility of war in the region.
Preventing conflict, okay,
Yes.
and promoting international cooperation, especially in the maritime domain.
How can, final pahabol na question, sorry. Somebody just asked here. How do we avoid the Philippines getting involved in any war in Asia? How can we avoid being part of a war here in Asia? We are now part of this NDT, BFA, EDCA. Are we inevitable ba na if war happens if an accident happens between US and China in the sea, will we Philippines be forced to side with US with all this rhetoric, the anti-China rhetoric? Will we get involved in a war that we don't want, a war that is not our war? How can we avoid that, Professor Rommel Banlaoi?
I am very sorry to say that right now we are siding with the United States under this government.
So unfortunately, if there's a war, we might get pulled into a war.
Yes, that is why I am very concerned that because of this preference to side with the United States, that might lose our flexibility.
Yes.
That's why
You have to come here another session,
for another-
just this topic.
Yeah.
How to avoid getting into a war, how to become like Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam. Thank you once again to the very brilliant, eloquent Professor Rommel Banlaoi, also book author and very good writer. Thank you very much, Professor. We have simple gift here at Kamuning Bakery for outstanding speakers like Professor Rommel Banlaoi, our favorite. He is not only foremost counterterrorism expert in Southeast Asia and the Philippines, but also one of the most respected geopolitics, international diplomacy experts also. Thank you very much, Professor, for speaking here at Pandesal Forum. By the way, Professor, in the Bible, I know you are a Christian. In the Bible, it says, if people throw stones at you, representing conflict and war, we should throw breads. You know the Bible?
I'll use this as my weapon.
Yes, yes.
I will weaponize.
Understand. This is better. Parang water cannon. Pandesal cannon next time. Thank you very much. Do we need to stand ba, Nilo? Or nakatayo daw tayo? One picture with the pandesal na nakatayo. And then yung book.